John's Gospel, chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they clothed him in a purple robe, and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to our law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power to either free you or crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of the emperor. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes the emperor." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of the preparation of Passover week, about midday. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but the emperor," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. The climax of Jesus before Pilate. Have you ever thought, what would it have been like to be present on this occasion? To be an eyewitness to these events? Well, here's a story that gives us a glimpse of this trial through the eyes of one of the Roman soldiers. It's called A Governor Under Pressure. My name is Tertius, and I work as assistant to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Israel. The governor's residence is in Caesarea, which is a pleasant spot on the coast, but he also keeps a house in Jerusalem. He needs to be there during the religious festivals, because that's where any problems are likely to surface. I want to tell you about an incident on our last visit to the city for the Passover festival. It concerns a most unusual criminal trial, and I still puzzle over it. The matter first came to our attention quite early, on the Friday morning of Passover weekend, when we received a delegation of Jewish leaders. They had taken a man called Jesus into custody. They claimed he was stirring up a rebellion and was calling himself a king. They wanted him executed. I informed the governor, and he asked me to arrange a sitting of the court. So we got things organised, and the prisoner was brought before the governor. Person, not the type who would lead a rebellion. Well, the governor began by questioning Jesus in the usual way, "Why are you before the court? What have you done?" and so forth. But Jesus didn't answer him. We were absolutely astounded. Usually the accused is very quick to defend themselves. Anyhow, Pilate decided to try a different approach. He said to the prisoner, "Don't you realise that your life is in my hands? All I have to do is say the word and you will be executed immediately." This time Jesus did reply, and his words quite unnerved Pilate. He said, "You don't have any power at all unless God gives it to you." So the governor asked Jesus straight out, "Are you a king?" Jesus replied, "I was born to be king, but my kingdom is of another world." I think by this time Pilate was starting to get a better picture of what he was dealing with. But then something happened that troubled him even more. A servant arrived in the court with a message from Pilate's wife. The note read, "Don't have anything to do with this man. I've had the most terrifying dreams about him this morning. He's completely innocent." Pilate was really on edge by this time. He was certain the accusations were false, but he also knew the chief priests could make life difficult for him if he went against their wishes. And then an idea came to him. Every year at Passover time, the governor gave a pardon to a prisoner. So Pilate went outside and onto a balcony to address the crowd that had gathered. He said, "I'm making an announcement about the annual action to pardon a prisoner. This year I will give you a choice. Do you want me to release Barabbas, the murderer, or Jesus the Christ?" Pilate thought the ordinary people would be bound to choose Jesus, but he hadn't taken into account the cunning of the priests. They got among the crowd and persuaded the people to ask for the release of Barabbas. They managed to work them up into quite a state and had them calling for Jesus to be crucified. Things were getting out of hand, so Pilate said, "Get me a bowl of water." When I brought it to him, the crowd became silent. Pilate said to them, "You all know this man, Jesus, is innocent. He has done nothing to deserve the death penalty." And with that, he washed his hands and said, "I am not to blame for the death of Jesus. You are responsible." The people said, "It's our call, no problem." And with that, Pilate instructed his soldiers to have Jesus flogged and put to death by crucifixion. We're back in Caesarea now, but I find myself reflecting on that courtroom drama in Jerusalem. There was something about this man Jesus throughout the trial. At times it almost seemed like Pilate was on trial, not Jesus. I think what I'm trying to say is this. Pilate found himself caught up in something much bigger than he realised. Perhaps he would have been wiser to have listened to his wife's advice instead of caving in to the self-serving priests and elders in Jerusalem. Let's reflect now on the dignity and bearing of Jesus as he went through the ordeal of this trial.
Meekness and majesty, manhood and deity in perfect harmony. Man is God, Lord of eternity, dwells in humanity, kneels in humility, and worships